Okay everyone, strap in because this chapter absolutely popped off. With the appearance of our boy Yuta Okotsu in the end of last chapter, we knew something big was coming, but I never thought we would be seeing Yuta's domain expansion this soon. But before we get into that, let's take a look at some previous moments that are highlighted in this chapter that almost solidly confirm answers to questions that the fanbase have been asking. The chapter kicks off with cutting back to the moment when Yuta decapitates Kinjaku. Remember, Kinjaku wasn't able to sense Yuta's presence due to Takaba's comedian curse technique clouding his cursed energy detection abilities. And the last thing that we hear from Kinjaku is that his will be inherited. Now, the fanbase, including myself, really didn't know what he meant by this. Did it mean that he was going to be switching bodies with someone else, or would it be more in the metaphorical sense in that Kinjaku has already made backup plans for his successors down the road? As Kinjaku is saying this, all of the cursed spirits from Geto/Kinjaku's body erupt and start going absolutely wild. And what's amazing is that we got a foreshadowing of this potentially happening way back in the hidden inventory arc when a live Geto was fighting against Toji. One of the reasons that Toji spared him in the first place is because he wasn't sure what would happen to all of Geto's cursed spirits if he killed him. But in this chapter, we get an answer to that question. Ultimately, it was probably the right move that Toji didn't kill Geto in that moment. As Yuta calls out to Rika, we see an onslaught of cursed spirits basically erupting from Kinjaku's body. As Yuta and Rika are dealing with this massive barrage of cursed spirits, Kinjaku's head gets held up by either his curse technique or a combination of multiple cursed spirits. But it kind of reminds me of the tree-like structure that is produced during his domain expansion. Kinjaku then tells his Kogane to make a new rule for the culling game, and that rule is to give Megumi Fushiguro the power to invoke the great merger between Tengen and the rest of society. Then, cutting to the inside of the tree itself, we see a fetus form of Tengen just laying in its center. So this basically gives us an explanation as to why this cross of light essentially appeared in chapter 248 and gave Sukuna, aka Megumi, the power to end the JJK world by initiating the merger if he really wanted to. And at this very moment, Kinjaku's will is now passed along to Sukuna. And with that, we see Tengen's cursed womb fly towards the direction of Sukuna, which we see had been received by him in the previous chapter. Then in the very next panel, we see something absolutely crazy, that is Kinjaku being stabbed straight through the head by Yuta. This was something I was actually going to make a video on in the future, given that we never saw Kinjaku's actual head get damaged. But I believe that this chapter gives clear confirmation that Kinjaku is most likely gone for good. We know that the source of energy needed to fuel reverse curse technique, aka the healing power in Jujutsu Kaisen, comes from the brain. Therefore, if the head is kept relatively intact, there's a possibility someone can be revived from the brink of death. Given that it's likely Kinjaku's brain has been stabbed clean through, I think there's very little chance that Kinjaku will be making any more appearances from this point forward, which I'm ultimately a little upset about since there was a lot of backstory that we didn't get to see from him, but maybe Gege will reveal that at a later time. Next, we see Kinjaku pleased that while he can't say that he's had much fun during the last 1,000 years he's been alive, he's happy he was about to go out fighting against Takaba. Now, he remarks that it's up to the current generation of sorcerers to have their share of fun, saying that they'll all have a blast. Cutting back to the present timeline, we see Rika and Yuta facing off against Sukuna. Yuta remarks that Sukuna's reverse curse technique output is starting to come back, and it may be a matter of time before he's able to use his domain expansion again. And this got me really concerned, since if Sukuna had his domain expansion on top of his world-cutting slash and black box ability that he has yet to reveal, I truly don't know how it'll shape up for the members of Jujutsu High. Gojo played a huge part in inhibiting Sukuna's domain, and I feel like if he simply got it back over time, it would completely diminish the effect that Gojo ultimately had on the outcome of this fight. But I guess we'll continue to see what happens. Yuta then comments on how if he would have stayed back and not chased down and killed Kinjaku, that Higuruma may be alive and they could have ensured the success of the Executioner's Blade plan. He then thinks to himself whether it would have been better if Maki was the one to take down Kinjaku, but then he stops himself. He understands that Rika's power was necessary to stop the huge outburst of cursed spirits once Kinjaku was killed, and it might have been too much for Maki to take on all by herself. And I think now Yuta is really facing the mindset of what it means to be the current generation's strongest. Your presence in specific places can massively alter the tides of scenarios, and I believe Gojo felt the exact same way. Jumping into action, Yuta goes to stab Sukuna, but he blocks the attack with a black wall of cursed energy. Sukuna then grabs the blade with his bare hands, which Yuta explains is only possible in the first place because he's covering his hands with small blades to prevent himself from actually touching it. Sukuna then yanks the sword from Yuta's hands while punching Rika, who charges in from behind him, but Yuta ends up landing a punch straight into Sukuna's stomach. Yuta, grabbing his sword from Sukuna, continues to double team Sukuna with Rika when he remarks that all the bad things that have happened are because of him and his shortcomings. He claims that he's the one responsible for everything, and I think that this mentality is exactly why Yuta is going to eventually surpass his mentor Satoru Gojo, and I'll explain exactly why. People like Gojo, Sukuna, and Kashimo believe that in order to ascend to the greatest heights of power in the Jujutsu world, you need to be selfish and fight for your own pleasures. But we've seen in the case of Yuji and Yuta that they fight to protect other people and are deeply saddened when they fail to do that. This means that the will to protect may be just as powerful as the will to fight for yourself. Now, fueled with his desire to see no more people get hurt, we see Yuta Okkotsu activate his domain expansion called True Love. We then finally get to see what Yuta's domain looks like, which is essentially a bunch of cross-like structures with multiple swords littered all over them. Sukuna then activates Hollow Wicker Basket, which, if you remember, is an anti-domain technique used to essentially nullify a domain's guaranteed sure hit. Yuta, wasting no time, rushes in and grabs a sword from the ground and goes to attack Sukuna and sends him flying after hitting him with Uro's technique, Thin Icebreaker. Okay, this was awesome and so cool to read and gives us clarification on what Yuta's domain actually does. Apart from having a sure hit attack, which of course we don't know what that does yet, Yuta can grab one of the countless swords across his domain and hit his opponent with one of many curse techniques he's copied, with one sword representing one copied ability. Now, it's unclear if he can only do this once per technique since we see the sword disappear in his hands afterwards, but Yuta then remarks that everything will come to an end inside his domain, planning on killing Sukuna right here and now. We then see the location Sukuna was hit and he's bleeding a good amount, something that no other character besides Gojo has really been able to do up until this point. Sukuna then understands the plan that Jujutsu High has come up with. He points out that he has to keep using Hollow Wicker Basket to defend against Yuta's sure hit, as well as also fend off his copied curse technique abilities. Additionally, he notes Yuji as being the person who can attack the soul and separate the body of Sukuna and Megumi. Laughing to himself, Sukuna mocks Yuji even more, telling him he's glad that he was given a role to play in this fight. Okay, so that is a crazy revelation that I believe will indicate how this fight could ultimately play out. I believe that Yuta and Yuji will ultimately be successful in separating Sukuna and Megumi's bodies, but not without substantial costs. Now, I don't know if this is a hint to Yuta potentially dying or being seriously injured in order to do this, but I think for thematic purposes, it has to come down to Yuji versus Sukuna in the end. But I would love to hear all your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Also, if you want to check out a video on why Hikari is my favorite character in all of JJK, check out this video. Stay curious, anime fam. Peace.